Last lesson, we talked about the semi colonization of China. Today, let's talk about what happened to Japan. In the mid 1600s, the Japanese shogun issued a series of edicts closing the country off from the world for the next 200 years. Although Japan experienced significant economic growth and relative peace during this period, sometimes known as the Pax Tokugawa, without any sustained contact with the West, Japan had no industrial capability. By 1853, Commodore Matthew Perry of the United States sailed to Japan and anchored in Edo Bay near Tokyo. He had instructions from U.S. President Millard Fillmore to open the country to trade with the United States. The Japanese had never seen smoke come out of a boat and described the American ships as giant dragons puffing smoke. Perry brought many gifts, but he also threatened to bombard the Japanese if they refused to trade with the U.S. The Japanese conceded, leading to what many call the opening of Japan. On March 31st, 1854, the U.S. and Japan signed a treaty that opened two ports to American ships and proclaimed peace and friendship between the two countries. European nations achieved trading rights with Japan shortly thereafter. Expanded trade helped Japan modernize and contributed to the country's rise as an industrial power. This slide shows Japanese Emperor Mutsuhito, who ruled from 1867 to 1912. Under his reign, Japan embarked upon a period of modernization in order to compete with the West. In addition, during this Meiji Restoration to modernize, Japan abolished feudalism and issued a new constitution of 1889 that made the country a democracy, with the emperor sharing power with the imperial diet. That's their Congress, their legislature. So the Meiji Restoration, Japan modernizing, industrializing, politically, economically. Japanese sought to modernize both its military and its economy. Motivation for updating its military forces came in large part from the desire to avoid the fate of its neighbor into the west, China, which was semi-colonized. In addition to national defense, the new Japanese military would help Japan to build an overseas empire. So Japan's going to be more of an imperialist power than a colonized power. Japan moved quickly to industrialize. The government sent Japanese students to study Western science and language, and it also invested in developing a modern transportation and communication network. By the turn of the 20th century, Japan was well on its way to becoming a modernized, industrialized nation. It soon joined the ranks of imperialist nations seeking natural resources, raw materials, and new markets for their economy. In the Russian-Japanese War, the Russo-Japanese War, Japan won a decisive victory against Russia and gained control of a significant amount of land, including significant portions of southern Manchuria, that's in China. By 1910, Japan further increased its imperial holdings by annexing Korea. This move solidified Japan's reputation as the strongest nation in the East. Japan further added to its empire at the start of World War I by allying with the British and seizing Germany's sphere of influence in China. Following the onset of the Great Depression in 1929, fascism took hold in Japan, as it did in Europe. The country's new fascist government made it a high priority to secure resources so that Japan could maintain its growing industrial base. With this in mind, Japan successfully conquered Manchuria in 1931. Next, it invaded China in 1937 and took control of much of that country's coasts and port cities. When World War II began in Europe in 1939, Japan allied with the Axis powers, the other fascist powers, Italy and Germany, and continued to build its empire. So the World War II began in Europe in 1939, but it really began in 1937 for Japan when it invaded China. There's some discussion questions for today's lesson on Japan.